One night with his boss ruined everything when my husband found out the worst way possible.
My husband overheard his boss talk about my bed skills to his coworkers and never came home. I loved my husband. He was one of the few people in my life who uplifted me in a time of my life where no one was on my side. But I did something horrible that changed everything between us and for us. I wanted to accept that there wasn't anything I could do to change it, but I wasn't so sure anymore. Hello, Redditors. My name is Daniela, and I'm 29 years old. I haven't been married for that long, but my husband and I were in a 3-year relationship before we decided to get married. Or at least he ended up proposing to me while we were at one of our family reunions. You could imagine the excitement I had about getting married to the love of my life at last. I had met him at a difficult time in my life. You could say he was my saving grace, my angel that I never knew I needed to rescue me. That time, my parents were going through a divorce after 20 years of being married, and my heart was broken by my first boyfriend, who I thought would one day be my husband. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I was a mess, even though I was close to graduating from my dream university and I was doing my dream course. I should have focused on what was important, but what I was going through clouded my mind so badly that I failed the first semester entirely. I broke off most of my friendships. I didn't show up for group projects, and I was possibly going to drop out of university just like that. Then one day, when I let myself have a day to be away from my troubles, I went to a coffee shop down the corner from my student residence. I wasn't planning on having much, and I wasn't planning to stay long either. I bought myself a coffee and a donut and went to sit in an isolated place. I must have looked weird or lonely because a guy approached me. He had the most beautiful pair of blue eyes I'd seen, and he was attractive. I remember what I thought when I looked at him, that this man was gorgeous, and he would make beautiful babies, but I had to obviously stop myself from thinking such things. When he got closer to me, he asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I didn't really think giving a stranger my life story would make me feel any better, so I told him a lie. He looked at me as if he didn't believe me, then proceeded to ask if I wouldn't mind any company. I wanted to say I had somewhere to go. I wanted to turn him down right then and there because I didn't want any company, but for some reason, his kind eyes really drew me in, so I let him come over with his latte and 2 muffins. To say it was the best day of my life in a while would be exaggerating, but he made me smile and laugh the whole time. He really knew what to say, as if he could tell I had troubles and he wanted to help me blow them all away like they were nothing. They weren't, but I wanted to dream just for a second. He gave me that chance, so I went back home to my comfortable little room and realized that I hadn't smiled in a while, and I wanted my happiness back so badly. That day, I told myself that I'd stop being miserable and start doing my best again because this wasn't what I wanted to amount to. A few weeks down the line, I had gotten back the strength to become an academic warrior. I made sure I came out with the best marks possible in the second semester, and I submitted each assignment on time. It wasn't easy to pick up where I left off, and it wasn't easy to try to make friends when people had already chosen their little circle in the time I was still wallowing in my misery. It all kicked off at some point, though, and although I wasn't over my parents' divorce, I was training myself to accept it because there wasn't anything for me to do about it. I learned in those moments that there's really just more to life than focusing on things you can't change. While I was trying to build myself back up and trying to enjoy my university life, I still went to that coffee shop and waited for days on end so I could meet that guy again. He never really introduced himself, and I was an idiot for never having asked for his name. But I wanted to see him again. I had that desire for months on end, and he didn't show up. I almost thought I'd never see him again when one day in spring he showed up so unexpectedly that I was shocked when I saw him. Seeing him then, I realized I hadn't paid much attention to him even though I did think he was effortlessly beautiful. He was, and even more than that. His actions were so kind, and he seemed like someone who attracted a lot of people to him because of his kind nature. It was interesting to watch him waiting in line and conversing with a 5-year-old child he didn't even know. I genuinely just wondered if seeing him again was a sign. What sign? I didn't even know myself. Walking up to him would possibly lead to the best thing in my life, or even the worst. Life was unpredictable, and yet I still took my chances. When I approached him and said hi, he was surprised to see me. I was even more surprised to see him because it had been months, and when I said that to him, he gave me the cutest smile I'd remember forever. He said he wanted to make up for those months and offered to buy me coffee today and another day, because he wanted to take me out on a date. Was I crazy for saying yes to a guy I'd just met for the second time? Yes, but again, I took my chances and I said yes. He introduced himself as Julian when he asked for my numbers so he can give me the time and place for our date. And then we started dating soon after, and things were pure bliss. I had even forgotten my ex-boyfriend Matthew existed because Julian was giving me so much love and taking care of me in every way possible that I couldn't possibly think of someone who only thought of using me for their own benefit. My boyfriend and I were so well fitted for each other that it was impossible to separate us. We worked towards our academic goals together, but we waited to move in together because we thought that should be something for marriage. We spent our 3 years so happy that I never noticed how much time had passed because once we graduated, we thought about the life we'd be starting together. And that was all that mattered. Never the time. It wasn't until on our 3rd year anniversary, he asked if I wouldn't mind going to a family reunion with him that everything changed. That morning, I was oblivious to what he would do because we spent our anniversaries going to different places, and I didn't mind us going to be with his family during our special day. We spent a few hours helping around the house and talking to his family members. When his mother pulled me aside to talk to me, I didn't expect Julian to be behind me on his knee. I heard from the gasps around me and looked at them as they looked at something behind me. And when I turned around to find him like that, I wanted to cry. I hadn't expected this so early. I thought it would take us a few more years because we were still trying to be financially stable. But he said to me, as though he could tell what I was thinking and he wanted to reassure me, "We'll figure life out together, just be my wife and the rest will follow." I believed him because in all these 3 years together, he had become my best friend, my partner in crime, and the man I knew I could trust the most. And even though I had a tiny bit of doubt in my mind about this, I said yes once again, like I had 3 years ago when he asked me out on a date. And I wanted to believe that I wouldn't regret this decision. Our wedding day was amazing, and all our loved ones came, including my parents who decided to unite for one day just to support their daughter. Although I still had cold feet about that day, I wanted us to be together for a long time more than anything, and this encouraged me to walk down the aisle with my father by my side. And when I saw my husband cry, tears started welling in my eyes too. I realized at that moment that I was getting married to the love of my life, and it really was the happiest day of my life. There wasn't any need for me to think of anything else except him, and once we exchanged vows, we sealed it with a kiss. The honeymoon was just as great as the wedding, and we spent a week there together enjoying each other's company. We were in our own little bubble, and it felt like it was us against the world. There wasn't anything I remembered that could top those moments I shared with him. Once we got back home, our marriage was smooth sailing. We focused on each other and worked together once again as a time when we moved in together. What I loved most about my husband was that he helped me with the chores and cooking since it was just us two. Our parents came to visit here and there, but it was mostly us in our cozy little apartment. We had only decided to save and buy a house when we started having kids together, and that wasn't even in our plans anytime soon. We spent 4 years together, happy, and yes, we had our disagreements here and there, but we never really dwelled on them. We communicated and moved past them because we didn't want our marriage to have holes that will end up sinking our ship. And then, suddenly, in our 4th year, my husband wasn't as available to spend time with me as he usually was. I didn't accuse him of anything and patiently waited for him to have time for me, but things didn't get any better. It wasn't until one day that I went to his office to give him the lunch I made for him since he left too early before I could make him anything. I'd once visited him at work, so I knew where to go if I wanted to see him and what time his lunch was because he'd informed me, so if I wanted to bring him lunch, I wouldn't have any trouble. I got on his floor, and once I climbed off the elevator, I saw him standing with a lady, and the way he looked at her somehow didn't sit well with me. But I didn't want to be suspicious of my husband, so I asked the secretary to give it to him and left immediately. Once I was out of the building, I tried to calm down my breathing and my heart that was pounding very fast. So I took some deep breaths, and when I calmed down, I turned to leave, but a car honked at me. I wasn't sure if it was honking at me, but when I kept moving and it happened again, I stopped and turned to look who it was. The person rolled down the window, and when he fully showed himself, I saw my ex-boyfriend. I wasn't expecting to see him, and I did forgive him for all that happened those years ago, but I didn't want to see him right now. I walked away, but he kept following me, and I stopped again to ask him what he wanted from me. He said he wanted to grab some bite to eat and asked if I would mind joining him. I thought about it, and it wasn't a good idea, but I needed something to get my mind off of what I thought I saw. So I agreed, impulsively perhaps, and I ended up going to his favorite place around the corner to have lunch. No, we caught up on each other's life, and I found out he wasn't married. It was a shock of its own, but I didn't dare ask why. For 30 minutes we talked, and then we both had to go back to work. He offered to take me, but I refused, so he asked for my number instead. I hesitated and just gave him because I thought the past was in the past, and there was no reason to be cautious about this since nothing would happen between us anyway. I was so wrong. I was so wrong because we started talking so much that I started getting excited whenever we had to meet up for lunch. We went to the same place we went to the first time we saw each other again, and I was slowly starting to enjoy being in his company. I felt as though he was a breath of fresh air from the lonely days without my husband, and made up for the nights my husband would go to bed without even telling me goodnight by texting me until late. It became a nasty routine at one point, and although I thought a friendship was blooming between us, there might have started to be more, but I didn't think much of the subtle looks he gave me and little gestures he made. The flowers he'd give me whenever we met, and chocolates because he remembered how much I loved them. He was tapping into my weaknesses slowly but surely, and I knew it, and I let it happen. This led to something happening a few months after we met again. We were supposed to meet up for lunch as per usual, and that day my husband had left for his business trip for a few days. Matthew ended up canceling on me for lunchtime and told me to meet up with him at a certain time because he had something else to do. I went along with it, and when the time came for us to meet, we ended up going to his place. Yes, I should have known this was a trap, and what made everything worse was I perhaps wanted all of this to happen. When we had arrived, we headed straight for the living room, and at first, he seemed in a chatting mood as though he wasn't going to make any move on me. It was fine by me, and as much as my husband was still neglecting me, I wasn't sure an affair would solve anything. Then, while we were watching movies, Matthew got a little too close. I didn't mind it at first, so I let it be as we kept commenting and laughing at what was going on screen. He then turned to look at me, and I asked why he was staring, to which he replied, "You're beautiful." I didn't want to react. I didn't want this to waken anything within me because I knew what happened the last time I let this man fool me. But still, I was so weak and so lonely that my heart raced and my cheeks flushed. It was the first time in months since I'd been told I was beautiful, and to fall for such a cheap trick. It was stupid of me because when he saw my reaction, he leaned forward and kissed me. All those feelings I tried to ignore resurfaced, and I became impulsive and I kissed him back. We made out on his couch, and before you knew it, he lifted me up to his bedroom. There, a lot of things took place. I did a lot of things I came to regret once we were done, and although I did regret it, we kept it up for the next few weeks. Even when my husband returned from his trip, we still met and had sex, over and over again. Except for one night where I wanted to spend it with my husband and treat him to a full-course meal because of the guilt I felt for what I was doing. Things were not smoothing over for us, but I kept trying to bring us back to how we used to be. He still wasn't attentive, but he tried to come back home as early as possible to meet me halfway. It only lasted for a week until he completely didn't come back home, for a whole week. I was very worried, so I called everyone I knew. I called my in-laws who didn't know where he was. I called his friends and they had no idea either. I was such a mess at work because I was thinking about where my husband could have possibly been. He didn't contact me or tell me if he's busy with a business trip somewhere. He went quiet on me. The only way I could feel sane was by going to see Matthew and sleeping with him again. This wasn't a healthy pattern I had set for myself, but I wanted to use someone to forget about my troubles and my husband missing. It felt like all those years back when everything was falling apart. Once a week had passed, I took a day off from work to cool my mind. It was a good idea because I ended up relaxing and taking my mind off my husband in a better, much more healthier way. I went out for a jog and watched movies and ignored everyone who was texting me, including Matthew, because I wasn't in the mood for him. Later on, I decided to go shopping for clothes and get a message on the way back home. Once I got there, I found my husband on the couch. He looked exhausted, and it looked as though he'd developed a beard in just a week of going missing. I didn't approach him at first because I felt something was off about what was going on. I knew somehow that whatever conversation we would have was going to change things between us. When he noticed I was in the room, he looked over at me, and the way he stared at me said a lot. He knew something, and his next words confirmed my suspicion and biggest fear. "Why did you cheat on me?" I wonder how he found out about it, and I didn't have any way to answer him, so I denied doing it. I lied and said, "I never did such a thing, and I'd never betray him like that," but he looked me in my eyes and told me how he overheard his boss telling his coworkers about my bed skills. How I was a wild freak in bed. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't even want to admit it. How could I tell my husband that I cheated with my ex? And to think that very ex was his boss. I should have known something was up when my ex started being attentive to me, and I should have known it was all part of his game. My head was spinning, and from my lack of a response, he took it as an answer and left again. He came back the next day and said he'd cleared his mind, and he wanted us to start over again. I accepted this and swore I'd cut off all ties with Matthew. That night, we slept together for the first time in months, and the next morning, I found divorce papers next to the bed with a note that said, "Leave my house, please." I was devastated because I thought we'd finally patched things up, and I cried. I stayed to demand an explanation, but he wouldn't listen to me, and so I was kicked out and I had to look for some place to stay. I went over to Matthew's place to confront him because it was all his fault this happened. There was a lady I'd never seen at his place, and she answered the door. She called Matthew, and he had this evil smile on his face, which meant he knows what he did. I asked him why he ruined my life, and he told me he saw a chance and he took it because he knew how easy I was most times. I went back home to stay with my dad because I didn't have anywhere to stay. He knew something was up, and I told him what happened. As expected, he was disappointed in me. Work wasn't going so well either because I was distracted, and I didn't put in the effort to finish most of the projects. I couldn't even feel pity for myself because I did this to myself. I finally accepted the divorce and signed the papers. We officially divorced in our 4th year of marriage, and I didn't ask for anything. Over a simple misunderstanding, I ended up in the arms of a man, and I ruined my own marriage. There was no one else to blame but me, and I'd live the rest of my life knowing I ruined a good thing. Asterisk update asterisk. A year later, I discovered that I was HIV positive. Apparently, the night my ex-husband and I slept with each other, he infected me with it from wherever he caught it. It was the most devastating thing to have gone through, and I was too ashamed to tell anyone about it. Julian blocked my numbers and on social media as well. It was clear he had no intention of speaking to me again. His parents found out about the divorce, but luckily he never told them what was the cause of it. I still talked to them to check if he was okay. My mother knew the real reason and scolded me about what a huge mistake I made and how much of an idiot I was. As per usual, Matthew and I didn't talk anymore. I didn't try to stay in contact with him, and I moved to another state to get away from my humiliating past, and I didn't know who would want me now with this illness. I figured it was my fault for getting it because if it wasn't for me, my ex-husband wouldn't have gone out and contracted such a thing. I had to come to terms with everything that had happened. It ruined my life, and I was going to be on medicine for the rest of it. I wasn't even sure if Julian knew that he had it, and if he was getting treated to it. I had no right to such things anymore, but in the back of my mind, he was still the man I fell in love with, and I still cared about his health. I regret everything that happened, and if I could take it all back, I really would. I'd even beg Julian to take me back, or I wouldn't have started meeting up with Matthew again. I won't blame him because I gave in to temptation, and at the end of the day, I lost someone precious to me. This is something that I can never recover from, and I'd spend the last days of my life wondering why I never just spoke to my husband and made my feelings clear, because maybe then we could have saved our marriage together. I forgot to remind myself that this was a two-way street and not just an alone thing. If there is any advice you can take from this, it's please don't take your person for granted and communicate, because it could save the both of you and your relationship. Friend found my Tinder profile and made a plan with my husband to ruin my life forever. You guys won't believe that my husband's friend found my Tinder profile and went to report me to my husband. I know what's on your mind would be why I had a Tinder profile in the first place while I was married, but that's besides the point. His stupid friend ratted me out and made a plan with my husband that brought about my downfall. This is all because I had snubbed him. What was his business if I had a Tinder profile? Couldn't he have looked the other way? No, he had to go and tell my husband because he's a bitter, lying opportunist. Gah, I have never hated a person so much. Right from the time my husband and I were dating, he had always acted weird with me, like he didn't trust my relationship with my husband. What was his problem? It was like he felt threatened by me and didn't like the fact that I had come and stolen his spot from my husband. Yeah, I know I'm still going to explain why I had a Tinder profile. It's a rather complex story, but I'll start from the beginning. I just hope you guys won't hate me. My name is Rachel, and I'm 26 years old. My husband's name is Matt, and he's 28 years old. I got to know Matt in college 4 years ago. Yeah, we attended the same college, but different majors, though. He majored in environmental design while I majored in film and media production at the Arizona State University, so we learned at the same campus. I was running late for a class, so I bumped into him while on the way. He had been with his friend, Connor, then. I smiled up at him as he bent to pick my things that had scattered on the floor while his friend just started on without offering to help. I hope you're witnessing the evidence of his bad character and attitude. My husband and I started seeing each other all over campus, although I don't know how that was possible, but I had just chalked everything up to fate. We attended parties together, and of course with his infamous friend Connor, who still stared at me like I was a leech. Throughout the time when my husband and I were still in the friendship stage, I don't think I ever talked to Connor. At first, he scared me, but then I got to find out he was just a nitpicking busybody who was just looking for me to slip up and only got worse after I snubbed him. I recall when we, my husband Connor and I, had gone for a bonfire night hosted by my husband's course colleagues, and my husband had left me to go and get us drinks. We had not started dating by this time still. Connor had been by my side and watched as guys came around to talk with me and have a good laugh. When the guys were gone and I was wondering where my husband had gone, you all wouldn't believe what Connor had said to me back then. He had asked me to blow him in the bushes, that he knew I was just a cheap prostitute that wanted to sink my claws into his friend, and he wasn't going to allow that, so I best suck him off and be on my way. Can you imagine that? I had stared at him and couldn't close my mouth at what he had implied. Then I laid into him. I insulted the life out of the no-good MF because he was delusional to assume I would ever want to blow him off. You guys, since that day, Connor has been watching out for my downfall, and he finally succeeded in achieving it. My husband and I began dating when he was done with college, and I was in my final year of college. We dated for a year, and we married on the anniversary of him asking me to be his girlfriend. I got promoted from girlfriend to wife on the same date. We had been married for a year plus some months, and we had been just fine. I made it clear to my husband that I didn't like his friends, so he made sure to hang out with him outside the house or when I wasn't around. So I never got to see him, and I was happy for that. Like I said, my marriage with my husband was smooth. We had the most fun. He was a kind and sweet man when he wasn't listening to his friend, that is. I loved my marriage, and I loved my husband. Now as to why I had a Tinder profile. My husband worked and was always providing for me, but then sometime later he stopped. I mean, he was the one that told me to not take on a job and that he was going to provide for me when we had gotten married. So I had stayed as a housewife, but then I got bored staying at home all day while my friends were busy shaking the career world. I didn't complain at first. Who liked to work when their husband was literally catering for all their needs? Definitely not me. Then my husband stopped giving me the weekly upkeep money, and when I had asked him for it, he had asked me why I hadn't worked ever since we got married. I was so shocked because this was the same person that had told me not to work, and he would provide everything I wanted. And all of a sudden, he was turning it around on me. I just knew this was as a result of his friend's influence. It just had Connor written over it like a stale pie. So I struck out. You couldn't blame me for that. I took my girlfriend's advice and opened a Tinder profile for escort services. I needed quick cash, and I was extremely beautiful, if you don't mind me bragging. And since my husband has refused to pay for my upkeep, I was going to take matters into my own hands. I had just wanted to get into it and make a little cash on the side and then quit. That was the goal when I built the Tinder profile. Sure, I was married, and so what? Most married people were doing way worse than what I had done. My husband wasn't providing for me because he had decided to listen to that cat of his friend. And what was wrong that I listened to mine? I saw no qualms in that. I built the Tinder profile and didn't put my real picture. I just wanted to test it out and see how it was. Of course, I wasn't scared of my husband finding out because there was no way he would go near one of those online social dating platforms. I was safe. Or so I thought. My first escort date had gone incredibly well, and so did the second one and the third, and I had racked up enough cash to see me through an entire month if I was living above my means. I was elated, and it showed on my face. My husband noticed and thought I had gotten a new job, LOL. I told him I had, but I was still angry with him. This was our first ever big argument since we got married, and I had promised myself I wasn't going to forgive him easily. I mean, if you were in my shoes, would you? And besides, having a Tinder profile was much more beneficial than when he provided for me. I was on top of the world, making money, seeing places, meeting people, going on dates. My husband never suspected a thing, by the way. He was always busy with work. Apparently there was a project. I had heard it on call, he hadn't told me directly. So sometimes he would stay at the office till the next day and only come back to freshen up and didn't even pay me no mind. He was too busy to care if I was alive or dead. Can you imagine that? But I was thriving just fine, and I loved his absence because it gave me freedom to build my profile and ratings on Tinder. My life was amazing, but I didn't know it was coming to hunt me back. Anyway, after 3 weeks, it seemed my husband had finally noticed that I wasn't too happy with him, and he thought of making it right, but obviously wrong timing. On that day, I had a date with a guy I had met through Tinder who I thought was in love with me. Till now, I don't know how I had managed to navigate the whole thing. My husband got back home and said he had made a reservation at a fancy restaurant, and all I just had to do was put on a pretty little dress and follow him. On getting there, it was the same restaurant I and my Tinder date had agreed to meet. The man was already waiting for me, but luckily my husband and I had been seated at the other end of the place, and I could see the man out of the corner of my eyes, but he couldn't see me. Throughout the entire dinner, my heart had been in my throat as to whether the man would spot me and approach my husband, and I didn't even pay any mind to what my husband was saying. When my ears perked up to what my husband was saying was when he said something about his friend Connor. That it had been Connor that had advised him to stop giving me my weekly upkeep, and then he was stressed about an incoming work project and blah blah blah. I knew Connor's claws had been all over my husband's decision to stop giving me my upkeep money. My husband apologized and said he would resume the upkeep money so that I wouldn't have to work again. Lol, funny of him to think I was going to quit. I mean, I should have quit. He had apologized, but I knew he could be influenced by his friend again, and he would quit giving me money. How would I have been able to keep up with my extravagant lifestyle then? So I didn't quit, and I dug a deeper hole for myself. Everything was going perfectly well, you all. My husband didn't know about anything because I was doing a perfect job of hiding it from him so well, until I slipped. I slept with one of the men I had gone on a date with from Tinder. I hadn't meant to, I swear, but I had missed the touch of a man, and my husband was too busy with work or hanging out with his friend. So after a successful date, I had gone back with the man to his hotel, and I had shared his bed. It was fun at that moment, but I didn't know the guy would use it to blackmail me. 2 days later, it seemed like the guy had discovered I was married and sent a postmail to my address. Pictures of me and him in various promiscuous positions had been sent to my mail with a threat to pay him $300,000 or risk being called out. I was horrified because $300,000 was my whole life savings. I hadn't known there had been scammers on the dating platform, but I had just been riffed. I decided to ignore it at first because maybe he was bluffing, but then I had gotten back home from an outing with my girlfriends and found an envelope on my doorstep. My husband could have easily come back home and seen that, so I had to get rid of the blackmail. I withdrew all the money I had in my savings account, and all the money I had gotten paid from the men I had gone on dates with, and wired it into the account the blackmailer had written out for me. After 2 weeks of no word from my blackmailer, I could finally breathe fine thinking my problems had finally been over and I could resume going on dates. I was even so bold enough as to put my picture as my header. Bam, another problem came. My husband came back one day with his friend and said he would begin living with us. That's how my husband's friend began living with us. The very man who brought along my downfall with my husband. Apparently, Connor was having accommodation issues, so he had asked to stay with my husband. In fact, my husband had offered so happily because it was his friend, even though I, his wife, had told him I didn't like to be around his friend. It was as if he didn't value my opinions. I didn't like it that I had just been discarded like that, so I decided to keep on going on the Tinder dates. It just meant I was going to have to be more careful with Connor around. I didn't have any money to my name anymore, and the weekly allowance my husband was giving just wasn't cutting it anymore. I sound vain, but that was just how I was. I probably still am because my husband didn't have to go so far as ruining my life because of an ordinary Tinder profile. Anyway, I didn't know all these things would come back to bite me in the butt. I was extremely careful when it came to going out on dates. It was always in the mornings when I was sure my husband and his friend would have gone to work. The men always questioned it, but of course they didn't know it was because I was married. The only time I agreed to night outings was when I was sure my husband had traveled on a business trip and I could easily sneak past his friend. I was navigating that area well. I didn't even speak with the guy when we somehow managed to cross paths in the house, but I didn't know his anger towards me was brimming up every time, and his sentiments towards me hadn't changed. He still thought I was a boy *Ray. And he made it known one fateful day when my husband was on one of his usual business trips. He told me he didn't know why his friend had married me in the first place since I was only just after his money. Apparently, he had warned my husband against marrying me, but it seemed I had put some love potion in his friend's body, and he was going to root me out for what I am. I laughed that day and had given him a piece of my mind, too. Like, how dare he scrutinize me like that? He was right, of course, but he had no right to throw it in my face, LOL. I became more wary of him that day, but did I quit going on Tinder dates? No. Until I was caught. I didn't think anyone was going to be at home, so I had allowed my date to bring me back to the house when, lo and behold, Connor was in my face with my date holding the small of my back. I was tongue-tied like a deer caught in between the headlights. I quickly removed my date's hand from my waist and went on to explain that he was a business partner. A business partner when I had no business in the works. I didn't even know when the lie had let out of my mouth. Well, in my mind, Connor didn't need to know that, but he had quirked his eyebrows and said nothing. For a whole 2 weeks, I hadn't gone anywhere or risked being seen with anyone because Connor was prying too much for his own good. He was still suspicious of the fact that I had a business partner, and the dad mentioned it in front of my husband when he had come back from his trip and we were having dinner together. He had just popped the question out of nowhere. What business was I doing? Well, I couldn't very well confess in front of my husband because I was already in too deep. So I had lied that I was looking into going into cosmetics and it was still in the works. That seemed to have pleased my husband a lot. I really didn't know what had changed his mind towards me working. He hadn't been like that when we had first gotten married. I didn't understand what had changed his mind, or who had changed his mind. Connor finally moved out. You all don't know how I thanked the gods for that miracle. But then it was as if I saw him everywhere. One particular time I was leaving for a date, he showed up to the house and said he wanted to see my husband, and asked me where I was all dressed up and going to. I had told him to mind his business and had pushed past him. I had been so reckless, and I still blame myself to this very moment of writing this. If I hadn't cut him off so quick and checked my surroundings to see if I was being followed, I wouldn't have been in the mess I found myself in. Connor had followed me. That was when he had also found my Tinder profile. I know because he had confronted me about it before he had told my husband. He had thrown the evidence of me frolicking around with another man when I was married in my face. Apparently, Connor had taken pictures of me smiling and flirting with my date. He said he knew I was a *Ry and was glad I was finally showing my true colors. I begged him that night like I had never begged anyone before. I promised him I would delete the profile and everything that he didn't have to report it to my husband. I had said I would anything to that disgusting slime, but it seemed he was a much loyal friend than I had thought. Then he brought out pictures that the blackmailer had sent to me like 2 months ago. Apparently he had known for a while now and just wanted to catch me in the act, and I had fallen right into his trap, you guys. I had fallen directly into the trap he had laid out for me. Connor didn't waste any time in informing my husband, and of course, my husband believed him almost immediately. That man would believe anything coming from his friend in a heartbeat. However, the only thing he did when he got to know was throw me out of his house angrily. My husband was furious, actually, that after everything he had given me, and after everything he had done for me, I chose to repay him by thrusting myself into the arms of other men and accepting dates on Tinder. I apologized and told him that I hadn't known what had come over me, but my husband wasn't hearing that one bit. I had left his house and planned to go back to apologize once everything had calmed down. I thought as long as my husband hadn't sent divorced papers yet, things could be forgiven. I didn't know those two. My husband and I were planning a revenge against me. a revenge that ruined me. I had bravely gone back to the house after a week because I wanted my husband to forgive me so badly. But as I stepped into the house and I saw Connor with him, I knew something bad was about to come out of this. My husband had said he was going to forgive me, but he wanted to know what I found in those Tinder dates. I told him I didn't know what I had seen in them the first place, that I had probably done it for the thrill. Connor had the gall to laugh at that moment. Can you imagine the idiot that had put me in this mess laughing at my groveling? Okay, maybe I was the idiot that had put myself in the mess, but he had no right to laugh at me. Anyway, my husband told me he needed to see me on one of those Tinder dates, and I should have seen that as a red stoplight sign. But I wanted to please my husband, so I agreed. I opened up my Tinder account. I still cringe to this very day every time I remember what I put as my header. Hot and yummy and ready to escort you to only the right places. Almost immediately, there was a request for a date. I hadn't known this was all a part of their plan. I met up with the man that evening, knowing my husband was close by at the restaurant, watching me smile and flirt and enjoy fine dining with another man. Everything was going well until all of a sudden my husband's friend walks up to me and points at me and screams to the whole restaurant that I was a married woman and was entertaining dates from other guys. That how could I do such a thing? My jaw dropped to the floor at that statement, and I was embarrassed to my bones because they had been the ones that had wanted me to go on the date. The stares I had gotten from the crowd at the restaurant was palpable, and I covered my head in shame and left there. But apparently my husband and his friend weren't done with me and proceeded to tell all my friends that I had gonorrhea and that they should stay away from me because I had gotten it from another man. It just implied the fact that I had cheated on my husband, and he was letting them know. I was confused when I started getting messages of a speedy recovery and what had propelled me to cheat. Then I called one of my friends, and she told me her husband had texted them and that she couldn't be friends with me anymore because her husband didn't like the fact of her being friends with a cheater. That had been the replies of almost all my friends that night, and I had to run back to my husband and ask him why he was doing this to me. However, I didn't make it to the house because the police apprehended me in the middle of the road. Apparently, they had been looking for a drug baron who sold drugs in the dark streets of Arizona, and I had been last seen with him. So they didn't know whether to think I was his customer or if I knew anything about him, but I had to follow them to the station first. They found drugs in my bag. My Tinder date had put drugs in my bag and tried to frame me. I told them I had no involvement in it and had only met the guy on Tinder. I even showed them the app and my chats with the man. I had to release myself on bail with the last of my savings, making me well and truly broke, and friendless and husbandless. My husband sent me divorce papers by the time I had bailed myself out of the station. But it had all been my husband and his friends doing to teach me a lesson. They had set me up with the man and had him implant the drugs to give me a little scare. And it did more than give me a little scare. I was associated with a drug dealer and had possession of drugs on my criminal sheet. I had no money and my life was ruined. My friends thought I had an STD and didn't want to associate with me anymore, so I moved away. I learned my lesson the hard way.